Victor Harper stood at the edge of the overgrown lawn, surveying the crumbling structure before him. The Thompson house, a relic of another time, loomed large against the backdrop of the midday sun, its faded paint peeling like the memories it held. To Victor, this house represented a mere inconvenience, a barrier to his grand vision of luxury condominiums that would redefine the town's skyline and fill his pockets with yet more wealth. The architect at his side flipped through the blueprints, oblivious to the history oozing from the brick walls and sagging roof. "Mr. Harper," the architect began, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose, "with the right renovations, this could be a prime location. Just imagine—" Victor cut him off, his voice laced with impatience. "Renovations? No, we're demolishing it. The town needs something modern, something that brings in revenue." He gestured dismissively at the house, his expression a mix of pride and detachment. "A luxury condo complex will attract the right clientele and transform this neighborhood." The architect hesitated, glancing back at the house as if sensing the weight of its history. "But there are voices in the community, Victor. People want to preserve this place. It's part of their history." Victor rolled his eyes, his jaw tightening. "History? This place is a dump. A few old memories aren't worth the real estate potential." He glanced around, noticing a group of locals gathering across the street, their expressions a blend of concern and anger. "Let them complain, it won't change anything." As the architect nodded reluctantly, Victor's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the town's future shimmered like a mirage. He envisioned sleek buildings, bustling shops, and families moving in, all drawn by the allure of a new, upscale lifestyle. The old house was merely an obstacle in his path, and he felt no remorse in making that choice. Across the street, George Thompson sat on the creaking porch of his beloved home, his eyes clouded with nostalgia. The once vibrant flowers in the garden had wilted, mirroring his own fading spirit. He clutched a weathered photograph of his late wife, their smiles frozen in time, and felt a pang of sorrow. The house had been a sanctuary for them, filled with laughter, love, and cherished moments. Now, as he watched men in hard hats approach with tools and machinery, he felt a sense of helplessness wash over him. "George, don't just sit there, they're going to tear it down," his neighbor Ruth called out from her yard, her voice laced with urgency. She knew how much the house meant to him, how every corner echoed with the whispers of a life well lived. "We should go over there and protest." "Protest? What good would that do?" George replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "They've made up their minds. This house is just a piece of property to them." Ruth stepped closer, her brow furrowed with concern. "But it's your home. You can't just let them take it away without a fight." George sighed heavily, his heart aching at the thought of losing the only place that held the essence of his wife and their shared dreams. "I have no power here, Ruth. They see dollar signs. I see memories. It's a losing battle." As the sound of machinery roared to life, George felt a tightening in his chest. He rose from the porch, leaning on the railing as if it were the only thing holding him together. The workers moved with an air of indifference, unaware of the lives intertwined with the walls they were about to dismantle. He could almost hear the laughter of children playing in the yard, the soft whispers of his wife as they shared dreams of a future that would never come to pass. Meanwhile, Victor stood with his arms crossed, watching the workers prepare for the demolition. He felt a rush of exhilaration at the thought of progress, of bringing something new to the town. But as the workers began to set up the wrecking ball, a flicker of annoyance crossed his face at the gathering crowd. They were shouting, waving their arms, expressing their discontent. "Get ready!" he barked at the foreman, a burly man with a hard hat sitting low on his brow. "We're starting this demolition now. I don't care what those people think." "Boss, maybe we should wait a bit," the foreman suggested, glancing nervously at the crowd. "They're really upset about this place. It'd be wise to—" "Wise?" Victor interjected, his voice rising. "This isn't about wisdom, it's about business. Let them yell. It won't change our plans." He turned away, dismissing the protests as if they were nothing more than the wind rustling the leaves. The wrecking ball swung ominously overhead, casting a long shadow over the dilapidated house. Victor felt a thrill of anticipation. This was what success looked like. bold, decisive, and unyielding. As the foreman signaled the workers to begin, the sound of metal clashing against metal echoed through the air. The first strike against the house resonated like a death knell, sending a shudder through George's bones. He stood frozen in place, his heart racing as he watched the wall buckle and crumble under the force of the wrecking ball. Dust and debris filled the air, obscuring his view of the life he had built within those walls. "Stop! Please stop!" he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. He rushed forward, fueled by a mix of fear and anger, only to be held back by Ruth, who grabbed his arm. "George, don't! You'll only make it worse," she pleaded, her eyes wide with concern. "You need to stay back. They won't listen to you." But George couldn't bear to stand idly by. "That's my home, my memories," he cried, tearing free from her grasp and stumbling forward, his hands trembling with emotion. He could see the workers moving like machines, disassembling the very fabric of his life, and it felt as if they were tearing apart his heart along with it. Victor stood on the sidelines, his expression hardening as he observed George's futile attempts to save his home. "What a scene," he remarked to the architect, a hint of disdain in his voice. "This is what happens when people cling to the past. They refuse to see the potential in change." The architect remained silent, his gaze shifting between Victor and the crumbling house, sensing a deeper significance in the unfolding drama that eluded Victor. The locals shouted their protests, their voices rising in an emotional crescendo. But Victor remained unmoved, focused solely on his vision of progress. As the wrecking ball swung again, George felt the ground beneath him tremble. The house groaned, a sound that echoed with despair, and he closed his eyes, imagining the life he had lived there. The laughter, the warmth of his wife's embrace, the quiet moments spent watching the sunset from the porch. All of it was being reduced to rubble. "Stop it," he yelled once more, his voice hoarse and raw. But the chaos continued, drowning out his pleas, and he felt a profound sense of loss enveloping him like a dark cloud. Victor looked on, oblivious to the pain he was causing, his mind racing with thoughts of profits and future accolades. He could not fathom the weight of history, the connections that bound George to that house. All he saw was an opportunity, a stepping stone to greater success, and he felt no remorse as the wrecking ball struck again. With each swing, the house crumbled further, and with it the memories that had defined George's life. The town may have changed, but the heartache of losing a home remained timeless, and as the dust settled around them, both men stood on opposite sides of a chasm created by choices made, oblivious to the profound impact their lives would soon have on one another. As the last echoes of the wrecking ball faded away, Victor Harper stood amidst the ruins of the Thompson house, the dust swirling around him like ghosts of the past. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and damp earth, reminiscent of a time gone by. Yet Victor felt only the exhilaration of progress. He was a man of ambition, a businessman who had clawed his way to the top, and today was a testament to his success. But as he surveyed the destruction, something caught his eye, a glint of light shining through the rubble. "Hey everyone, hold up!" Victor shouted, raising his hand to signal the workers to pause their efforts. Confusion flickered across their faces, but they quickly complied, ceasing their movements and stepping back from the debris. Victor stepped closer, curiosity igniting within him. What could possibly be hidden beneath the remnants of this forgotten home? As he knelt down to sift through the debris, Victor felt an unexpected twinge of guilt. He had dismissed the protests from the townsfolk, their pleas to preserve the house falling on deaf ears. But now, with the wreckage laid bare before him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was unearthing more than just wood and nails. He was digging into a piece of history, someone's history. His fingers brushed against something that felt distinct from the surrounding rubble. With careful movements, he unearthed a small, weathered object. It was a photograph, covered in a thin layer of dust, but still remarkably intact. Victor turned it over, revealing a faded image of a young boy with a broad smile. The boy's eyes sparkled with joy, a stark contrast to the desolation surrounding him now. In that moment, Victor felt a wave of nostalgia wash over him, an emotion he rarely allowed himself to indulge in. "Is that?" he murmured, squinting at the photograph. As he studied the boy's face, he couldn't help but recognize a hint of familiarity. The boy looked carefree, full of the innocent joys of childhood, something Victor had long forgotten in his quest for wealth. The picture was worn, but it held a vibrancy that seemed to transcend time. "Hey boss, what did you find?" one of the workers called out, breaking Victor's reverie. "Just a memory," Victor replied, his voice softer than he intended. He stood up, clutching the photograph in his hand, feeling as though it had somehow tethered him to a past he never lived. After a moment of hesitation, Victor made a decision that surprised even himself. He needed to find out who this boy was. It was a call to action that felt foreign, yet necessary. He had always been driven by profit and expansion, but this photograph stirred something within him, a desire to connect, to understand the life that had once flourished within these walls. "Let's wrap it up for today," he instructed the workers, who exchanged puzzled glances. "I need to take care of something." With the photograph tucked safely in his pocket, Victor drove his sleek black SUV toward the edge of town, where George Thompson's modest home still stood, a resolute relic amidst the chaos he had just unleashed. Victor's heart raced as he approached, the weight of the photograph heavy in his thoughts. He had no idea how George would react to him, especially after the demolition. What could he possibly say to a man whose home he had destroyed? Victor parked the car and hesitated for a moment, gazing at the worn facade of the Thompson house. Memories flooded him, not of his own childhood, but of the stories he had heard from his parents about their humble beginnings, the sacrifices they had made for his future. Wasn't that what this photograph represented? A life filled with love, laughter, and memories? Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the car and made his way toward the porch, where George sat, his silhouette a stark contrast against the fading light. The old man looked up, his expression a mixture of weariness and wariness. "What do you want, Harper?" George's voice was low, edged with bitterness. Victor swallowed hard, suddenly feeling the weight of his actions pressing down on him. "Mr. Thompson, I found something today." George's brow furrowed in confusion, and Victor could see the flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "What could you possibly want now? You've already taken everything from me." With a pained expression, Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph. He held it out, his hand trembling slightly. "I found this in the rubble. It's a picture of you, isn't it?" George's eyes widened, and he took the photograph gingerly, his fingers brushing over the image as if it were a fragile piece of glass. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice softening as nostalgia crept into his tone. "It was buried in the debris. I didn't realize how much this house meant to you." "To the town," Victor admitted, the words tumbling out with an honesty that surprised him. "I just wanted to understand." For a moment, silence enveloped them, the weight of the photograph bridging the chasm between their worlds. George looked at the picture, his gaze distant as memories danced behind his eyes. "That was me, a long time ago," he said, a hint of a smile breaking through his somber demeanor. "I was so carefree then. This house, it held so many memories of my wife and me. We built a life here." Victor felt a lump form in his throat as he listened to George's words. "I didn't realize I've been so focused on my plans that I didn't think about what I was destroying," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry." George's expression hardened for a moment, but the photograph seemed to soften his heart. "Sorry doesn't bring back my home, Harper." "I know," Victor replied, a sense of urgency in his voice. "But I want to do something. Something to honor what this house represented. I want to understand your story, your life here. Maybe together, we can find a way to remember it, to keep it alive." George studied Victor, searching for sincerity in his eyes. After a long pause, he sighed, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Why would you care now? It's too late for me. Because I've realized that wealth isn't everything, Victor said, his voice steady. I've spent so much time chasing success that I've lost sight of what truly matters. Community, connection, memories. I want to learn from you, George. I want to make this right. The old man's gaze softened as he looked back at the photograph. It's not just about the house, you know. It's about the people who lived here, the life we built together. I understand that now, Victor said, and I want to help you keep that life alive in some way. Can we talk about it? George's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but a spark of hope began to ignite. You really want to help? Victor nodded, a genuine smile breaking through his earlier tension. I do. I want to learn from you and find a way to honor your memories. As they stood there, two men from vastly different worlds, a fragile thread of understanding began to weave between them, a connection born not from wealth or status, but from the shared experience of loss and the longing to remember what once was. Victor Harper stood outside the modest Thompson home, a tinge of anxiety creeping into his heart. The sunlight spilled across the yard, illuminating the dilapidated structure that had seen better days, but now it was a shell of memories. He felt a strange weight in his chest, an uninvited twinge of guilt gnawing at him. The photograph he had discovered was still tucked safely in his jacket pocket, and he could not shake the feeling that it might change everything. As he approached the porch, George Thompson, the elderly owner of the house, appeared in the doorway, his brow furrowed and his body tense with resentment. George had always been a fixture in this neighborhood. His presence felt like an old tree that had weathered countless storms, but today he was a man on the edge, standing guard over the remnants of his life. What do you want? George asked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the stillness of the day. His eyes narrowed, filled with a mix of anger and sorrow, as he took in the sight of Victor, a man whose wealth had reduced his memories to rubble. Victor hesitated, the photograph feeling heavier in his pocket than ever before. Mr. Thompson, he began, but George interrupted, his voice rising. You think you can just come here after what you did? You destroyed my home, my life. What could you possibly want from me? The bitterness in George's tone was palpable, and Victor felt the sting of his words. I know I can't change what happened, Victor said, his voice steady, but laced with regret. But I found something in the ruins, and I think it belongs to you. He pulled out the photograph, its edges frayed and yellowed with age, and held it out tentatively. George's eyes flickered with surprise as he glanced at the image. It was a photo of a young boy with bright eyes and a carefree smile, a boy who looked so full of life. That's me, he murmured, his voice softening as he took the photograph from Victor's hands. I haven't seen this in years. I thought you might want it back, Victor offered, watching as George's expression shifted from anger to nostalgia. The lines of worry on George's face relaxed slightly as he traced the outline of his younger self in the photograph. Memories began flooding back, each one a testament to the life he had lived within those crumbling walls. Where did you find this? George asked, his voice now curious, even as a hint of suspicion remained. Amidst the debris when I paused the demolition, Victor explained, feeling an unexpected connection forming between them. I didn't realize how significant this house was to you until I found this. George's gaze remained fixed on the photograph, his mind racing through a lifetime of memories. It was more than just a house, he replied, emotion thick in his voice. It was my home, where I raised my children, where I shared countless moments with my wife before she passed away. You took that from me. I didn't know, Victor admitted, shame creeping into his voice. I got so caught up in my plans for development that I didn't consider the people whose lives were tied to this place. I'm sorry. For a moment, silence enveloped them, the weight of their shared understanding hanging in the air. George looked up, his eyes reflecting a mixture of pain and a hint of compassion. You may be wealthy, but you don't know what it's like to lose everything, he said softly, the hardness in his voice dissipating. You may have a mansion, but I had a home." Victor shifted uncomfortably, the truth of George's statement resonating deeply within him. He had built his empire on the backs of others, often overlooking the human cost of his success. "I know I can't replace what you've lost, but I'd like to learn more about your story. Maybe I can help in some way." George studied Victor for a moment, searching for sincerity behind his polished exterior. "Help?" he echoed, skepticism evident in his tone. "You want to help me after you've destroyed my life?" "I mean it," Victor pressed, his voice earnest. "I want to understand. I want to know what this house meant to you and how I can make amends. It's the least I can do." George's expression softened further, the flicker of hope mingling with his lingering resentment. "You really want to know?" he asked, a hint of disbelief creeping into his voice. "It's not just about the house, you know. It's about the memories, the laughter of my children running through the halls, the quiet evenings with my wife on the porch, the celebrations, the heartaches. It's everything." Victor nodded, feeling a knot form in his throat. "I can't imagine," he said quietly. "I grew up in a different world. I had everything, but I've always felt something missing. I was so focused on building my business that I lost sight of the people around me." George regarded him closely, the weight of their shared experiences beginning to bridge the gap between them. They both had their stories, different yet intertwined by the common thread of their pasts. "What was it like for you?" George asked, curiosity piqued. Victor took a deep breath, the memories surfacing. "I had a father who was never home. He was always chasing the next deal, the next big thing. I learned early on that success meant everything, but I never learned how to connect with people. I was always the outsider, always looking in." George nodded knowingly. "It sounds lonely." "It was," Victor admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought money would fill the void, but it never did. I realize now that I've been missing out on what truly matters. Family, community, connection." As they spoke, a bond began to form, both men peeling back layers of their lives, exposing vulnerabilities they had long buried. George felt a flicker of empathy for the man standing before him, a man who had not only taken his home but had also lost something vital in the process. "Maybe you can start by understanding the people here," George suggested gently, his tone shifting from anger to a tentative willingness to bridge the gap. "This town is more than just a location. It's a community with history, with heart. If you want to make amends, start here. Listen to their stories." Victor nodded, feeling a sense of purpose stirring within him. I want to learn and to do better," he said earnestly. "Thank you for sharing this with me, George. I know it's not enough, but I promise to honor the memories that this place holds." George looked at Victor, seeing a man who was beginning to embrace the idea of change. "We all have a past, Victor. It shapes us, but it doesn't have to define our future. Just remember, it's never too late to start over." As they spoke, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. In that moment, two men from vastly different worlds found common ground, united by the understanding that life is a tapestry of experiences woven with threads of both joy and sorrow. And as they shared their stories, a small flicker of hope ignited within them. Perhaps redemption was possible, not just for the lost house, but for their lives as well. Victor Harper sat in a quaint little diner on the edge of town, nervously glancing at the clock hanging above the counter. He had invited George Thompson to lunch, hoping it would be the start of something meaningful. The small space was filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the sizzling sound of bacon on the grill, a comforting ambiance that reminded him of simpler times, an irony considering he was about to face the man whose home he had just demolished. As he waited, Victor's mind raced with thoughts. What would George think of his proposal? Would he accept his efforts to make amends? He felt a knot tightening in his stomach, the weight of his previous decisions pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. The diner door swung open and Victor's heart skipped a beat as George stepped inside, his weathered face illuminated by the warm glow of overhead lights. George looked around, his expression a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. He spotted Victor sitting at a booth and made his way over, his gait slow but purposeful. "You're not going to try to sell me on some real estate deal, are you?" George asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Not at all," Victor replied, motioning for him to sit. "I just want to talk about the house and the community. I thought we could brainstorm some ideas together." He gestured to the menu. "How about lunch first? My treat." With a reluctant nod, George slid into the booth, eyeing Victor with suspicion. "Fine, but I'm not here to pat you on the back for bulldozing my life's work." Victor swallowed hard, the truth of George's words hitting him like a slap. "I understand. I can't change what happened, but I'd like to explore ways to honor your memories and contribute something positive to the town." Their waitress arrived, a cheerful woman in her 50s with a bright smile. "What can I get for you gentlemen today?" she chirped. "I'll have a cheeseburger and fries," Victor said, forcing a smile. "Just coffee for me," George replied, still scanning the diner as if searching for something he had lost. Once the waitress left, Victor leaned in, his tone earnest. "George, I was thinking about a community project, a garden maybe. It could serve as a tribute to your home and bring people together. What do you think?" "A garden?" George scoffed, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "What do you know about gardening?" "Not much," Victor admitted, a hint of sheepishness creeping into his voice. "But I know it can create a sense of community. People can come together, share stories, and connect with each other. Your home held so many memories for you. I want to help create new ones for others." George narrowed his eyes, still wary but intrigued. "And how do you plan on doing that? You're just going to wave your magic wand and make it happen?" Victor chuckled, the tension easing slightly. "No magic involved, just passion and the willingness to listen to what the community needs. Maybe we could gather some volunteers, get input from the locals on what they'd like to see, flowers, vegetables, a place to gather. I can even pitch in some funds from my development budget." The waitress returned with their orders, placing the steaming plates in front of them. Victor took a moment to enjoy the sight of the food. It felt grounding amidst the chaotic whirlwind in his mind. He glanced at George, who had already taken a sip of his coffee, his expression contemplative. "What you're suggesting," George began slowly, "it could work. But it'll take more than just you and me throwing some seeds in the ground. People around here have been burned before. They won't just trust you because you say you want to help." "I know it won't be easy," Victor replied earnestly, "but I'm willing to put in the effort. I want to learn from you, from the people in this town. It's time I stopped being a stranger in my own community." George leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. "You talk a good game, Victor. But what happens when the shine wears off and you're just another businessman looking for profit?" "I'm not looking for profit in this," Victor insisted, the urgency in his voice rising. "I want to invest in something that matters. This town matters." A silence hung between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. George's gaze drifted to the window, where children played in the nearby park. "You have a lot to learn about this town and its people. But if you're serious about this, I'll help you. We can sketch out some ideas together." "Really?" Victor's heart raced, hope blossoming within him. That would mean a lot. "Don't get too excited," George warned, a glimmer of a smile breaking through his stern facade. "I'm not saying I trust you yet, but I'm willing to listen." As they finished their meal, they began discussing the potential for the garden. Victor pulled out a napkin and started jotting down ideas. "What if we included a memorial area for the old house? A space where people can share their memories?" George nodded thoughtfully. "And we could plant some native flowers, something that can thrive without too much fuss. People need to see that this garden isn't just another project. It's a living tribute." Victor felt a warmth spreading through him as they sketched ideas together. He had never imagined that a simple lunch could lead to such a collaborative spirit. It was a stark contrast to the solitary decisions he was used to making in his boardroom. As the conversation flowed, Victor found himself captivated by George's stories of the town's history. The way the community had come together in the past, the festivals they held, the friendships that had blossomed in the heart of the neighborhood. Each tale painted a vivid picture of a vibrant community, and Victor felt a longing to be part of it. "Did you know," George said, leaning in, "that this diner used to be a bakery? My wife and I used to come here every weekend for her favorite pastries. The owner would give us a discount because we were regulars." Victor smiled at the nostalgia in George's voice. "What was her name?" "Marie," George said, his voice thick with emotion. "She loved the chocolate eclairs, always said they were the best in town." For a moment the air was heavy with silence, a shared understanding of love and loss lingering between them. Victor realized that George's memories were not just about the house, they were about the life he had built, the connections he had nurtured. "Let's make sure this garden has a little corner dedicated to Marie," Victor suggested. "We can plant her favorite flowers." George's eyes softened at the thought. "That would mean a lot to me. It's the little things that keep memories alive." As they left the diner, Victor felt a renewed sense of purpose. The sun shone brightly overhead, casting a warm glow over the town. He glanced at George, who walked beside him, his shoulders slightly less hunched than before. "Thank you for giving me a chance, George," Victor said, his voice sincere. "I won't let you down." "Just remember, actions speak louder than words," George replied, a hint of a smile on his lips. "Let's see if you can back up that promise." With that, they walked side by side, two men from different worlds, united by a common goal. A community garden that could bloom into something beautiful, a symbol of healing and connection amidst the remnants of the past. Unbeknownst to them, this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge both their perspectives and forge an unexpected bond that would change their lives forever. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the small town as the community garden project began to take shape. Victor Harper stood at the edge of the garden site, feeling a swell of pride and connection to the land that he had never anticipated. The once desolate area that had been the Thompson home was now alive with laughter and chatter as volunteers from the town gathered to plant seeds, paint signs, and prepare the soil. The air was rich with the scent of fresh earth and blossoming flowers, a stark contrast to the dust and debris that had once surrounded him during the demolition. "Victor, over here," a voice called out. It was George Thompson, the elderly man who had reluctantly become his ally in this endeavor. George was kneeling beside a patch of soil, his hands caked in earth as he guided a group of children, showing them how to plant marigold seeds. A light breeze ruffled his silver hair, and for the first time since they had met, Victor saw a glimmer of happiness in George's eyes. Victor approached, unable to suppress a smile as he watched the children giggle and squabble over who got to plant the next seed. "Looks like you're quite the teacher," he remarked, kneeling beside George. "I never knew you had such a way with kids." George chuckled, brushing dirt from his knees. "They're a good bunch. Reminds me of my own kids when they were younger. They used to love digging in the garden, getting their hands dirty. It was a simpler time." Victor nodded, feeling a pang of envy for the memories that seemed to flow so effortlessly from George. He had spent so much of his life focused on success and profit, often at the expense of genuine connections. "I wish I had that kind of experience with my family. We were always too busy for things like this." "Sometimes it takes a little push to realize what we're missing," George replied, his voice thoughtful. "You're doing good work here, Victor. The town appreciates it. They need this garden as much as they need the memories of what was lost." As they worked side by side, Victor felt a growing sense of belonging. The volunteers, a mix of young families, retirees, and local teens, shared stories and laughter, the atmosphere electric with camaraderie. Victor had never felt more at home in this town, and it was as if the very roots of the garden were intertwining with his own, grounding him in a way he had long forgotten. However, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the garden, Victor's business partner Mark arrived, his expression a mix of irritation and disbelief. "What is going on here, Victor?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the cheerful atmosphere like a knife. Victor straightened, feeling the sudden shift in energy. "Mark, we're building something meaningful for the community. Look at all the people who are coming together for this." Mark glanced around, his expression unchanging. "Meaningful, or a financial liability? You're wasting time and resources on this garden when we could be making real money developing the land into condos. This is not what we agreed on." "I know what we agreed on, but things have changed," Victor replied, his voice steady yet firm. "This isn't just about profit anymore. It's about helping people, giving them a place to connect." Mark scoffed, crossing his arms. "You're playing a dangerous game, Victor. You think these people care about you? They'll turn on you the moment they see you're not delivering. You need to cut your losses and get back to business." Victor felt a fire ignite within him, fueled by the warmth of the community that surrounded him. "And what kind of business are we running if we only care about profit? I'm not abandoning this project. I'm not abandoning them." Mark's eyes narrowed. "You're risking everything for a bunch of plants and flowers. Think about your future, Victor. You're not just letting yourself down, you're letting everyone down. This town doesn't know what's good for them." The tension between them crackled like static, and Victor felt the weight of Mark's words pressing down on him. He looked around at the smiling faces, the children digging in the dirt, the elderly volunteers sharing their gardening tips. "No, Mark," he said finally, his resolve hardening. "I'm not letting you dictate my choices anymore. I'm sticking with this." Mark's expression morphed into one of disbelief, then anger. "You'll regret this, Victor. You'll see. When this fails, and it will, you'll be the one left holding the bag." With that, he turned on his heel and stormed away, the tension lingering like a dark cloud over the garden. Victor took a deep breath, trying to shake off the negativity. George approached him, concern etched across his face. "Are you all right?" "I could hear him from here. He's not happy, is he?" "No, he's not," Victor admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But I can't let that stop me. I can't go back to just focusing on the bottom line. This feels right. It feels important." George nodded sagely. "Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone, but it's those moments that define who we are." Victor looked at George, appreciating the wisdom in his words. "I don't want to lose everything I've built, but at the same time, I can't ignore the connections I've made here. I feel like I've finally found a purpose." "Then you need to hold on to that purpose, Victor," George urged. "You're not just building a garden, you're building a community, and that's worth more than any amount of money." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow over the garden, Victor realized that the stakes had changed. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the people who had chosen to invest their time and energy into this project. They were counting on him, and he wouldn't let them down. He took a step forward, determination coursing through him as he called out to the volunteers. "All right, everyone, let's finish this garden strong. We've got a lot of work to do." The cheers that erupted from the group filled him with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. They were in this together, and together they would create something beautiful. As the sun rose over the small town, casting a warm golden hue on the freshly turned soil of the community garden, excitement buzzed in the air. Children ran about, their laughter mingling with the chatter of adults preparing for the opening ceremony. Victor Harper stood at the center of the garden, feeling a mix of pride and anxiety. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that had once solely wielded pens and contracts but now bore the grit of labor and new friendships. "Are you ready for this?" George Thompson approached, his weathered face breaking into a smile that radiated warmth and nostalgia. He had become an unlikely ally and friend in Victor's journey, a man whose history intertwined with the very ground they stood on. "I think so. It's just, I never expected this much support from the community," Victor replied, glancing around at the gathering crowd. People were setting up tables with homemade goods, flowers blooming in colorful patches alongside the garden's borders. "People can surprise you," George said, his voice a low rumble. "Sometimes they just need someone to believe in them first." As the local news crew arrived, the excitement intensified. A young reporter with a bright smile and an eager demeanor came straight to Victor, microphone in hand. "Mr. Harper, can you tell us what this garden means to you and the community?" Victor took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "This garden is more than just a piece of land. It represents a return to our roots, a place where we can come together, share stories, and build something lasting. It's a way to honor the memories of those who came before us, like George here, who has so much to share about the history of this town." George stepped forward, his hands clasped in front of him. "I grew up playing in the fields that once surrounded my home. This garden connects us to our past while offering hope for the future. It's our chance to grow together." The reporter nodded enthusiastically, capturing their words for the camera. Victor felt a swell of joy as the community filled with laughter, children planting seeds, and neighbors exchanging recipes. It was a celebration of life, and he was at the heart of it. But just as the ceremony began, the atmosphere shifted. A familiar face emerged from the crowd. Mark, Victor's business partner. His expression was one of fury, and he stormed toward them, eyes blazing. "Victor, what are you doing?" Mark spat, his tone sharp and accusatory. "You can't be serious about this. This garden, it's a waste of resources." Victor's heart sank as he faced his old friend. "Mark, I thought you'd understand. This is more than just a project. It's about the community." "The community?" Mark scoffed, throwing his hands up in exasperation. "You're throwing away our chance for real profit. Do you have any idea what this could cost us?" "Cost? You mean what it could cost you?" Victor countered, feeling his temper rise. "This isn't just about money anymore. It's about doing the right thing." Mark stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think these people care about you? They're just using you. I'll expose everything, the shortcuts we took during the demolition, the legal loopholes. You'll be ruined." Victor felt a chill run down his spine. The threat hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. The townsfolk who had gathered to celebrate began to murmur among themselves, confusion and concern evident on their faces. "Enough!" George's voice rang out strong and steady. The crowd turned to him, sensing the gravity of the moment. "You can't intimidate Victor anymore, Mark. He's chosen to invest in our community, to help us grow. If you want to threaten him, you'll have to go through all of us." Victor looked at George, gratitude swelling in his chest. He hadn't expected such loyalty from the man he had once displaced. The townspeople stood behind George, solidarity etched on their faces, ready to confront Mark's accusations. "Is that so?" Mark sneered, glancing around at the determined faces. "You think this will protect him? You're all just a bunch of naive fools." Before Victor could respond, George spoke again, his voice calm yet firm. "Let me remind you, Mark, that while you may have the power to manipulate people with your threats, the truth always has a way of coming to light. I've been documenting everything, the demolition, the promises made, and the community's response. I have evidence of your corrupt practices, and I'm not afraid to use it." The crowd gasped, the tension palpable as Mark's bravado faltered. "You wouldn't dare?" he shouted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Oh, I would," George asserted, standing tall. "This isn't just about Victor anymore. It's about all of us. We deserve better than your greed and deceit." Victor felt a rush of relief mingle with admiration for George. "You've been documenting everything?" he asked, hardly believing it. "Every step of the way," George confirmed. "And I'll make sure the community knows the truth about you, Mark. You can't bully us into submission." As the crowd rallied around Victor, their support overwhelming, Mark's demeanor shifted from fury to panic. He glanced from face to face, realizing that the tide had turned against him. "You'll regret this," he spat, backing away slowly, his bravado evaporating. "Not as much as you will," Victor said, a newfound strength coursing through him. "This community is worth fighting for." With Mark retreating, the atmosphere shifted back to one of camaraderie and celebration. The news crew, having captured the confrontation, turned their cameras back to Victor, the focus now on his resilience and the community spirit. As the ribbon was cut, cheers erupted, and the garden came alive with laughter and joy. It was a new beginning, not just for Victor, but for everyone who had come together to nurture the soil of their shared history. Victor turned to George, gratitude shining in his eyes. "I can't thank you enough for standing up for me." George chuckled softly, a twinkle of mischief in his gaze. "We're in this together now, Victor. You've shown us that you're willing to change, to learn from your mistakes. That's something worth supporting." As they walked through the garden, hand in hand with the community, Victor felt a profound sense of belonging. He had traded the emptiness of wealth for the richness of connection, understanding that true success lay not in financial gain but in the ties that bind people together. In that moment, surrounded by the vibrant colors of blooming flowers and the laughter of children, Victor vowed to always honor his roots, to remember that every choice he made had the power to impact lives beyond his own. This garden was not just a patch of earth, it was a testament to redemption, a living symbol of the community's strength, resilience, and love.